Good morning. Thank you all for coming this morning. It's wonderful to have you all together to talk about these very important and fresh issues. Quick housekeeping information. All of the participants are in audio only. Please make sure to keep yourself muted during the webinar. The chat is open and we welcome conversation and questions. This session is being recorded. You'll be able to access it later from our website. The recording and all the slides will be distributed to all participants as well. Very quickly, for the Nevada Housing Coalition, we are a membership-based organization. And if you're not already a member of the coalition, we would invite your membership. We'd love to have you participating with us and adding your voice to the housing discussion in Nevada. Information is being posted in the chat right now about joining NHC. This morning, we're all here to learn more about this huge opportunity for Nevada, and NHC is here to help advocate for housing alongside all of our amazing housing advocates and stakeholders. We'd be remiss if we didn't recognize and thank our Nevada congressional delegation. Their tireless efforts have brought much needed financial relief to Nevada. Staffers, we thank you all, and please pass along our sincere thanks to our congressmen and congresswomen. We are very grateful for all of their efforts and all of your efforts. To start off this morning, we're very happy to have the Nevada State Treasurer, Zach Conine, with us. He has been at the center of the recovery storm, and he and his office have been so helpful to all of us involved in the work of providing pandemic-related housing assistance to our Nevada neighbors. Thank you, Treasurer Conine, and thank you for being with us today to introduce the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework. Mr. Conine.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill. It's always a pleasure, and thank you for your work, especially in our rural communities, making sure that we can get housing assistance where we need it. And I've spoken to many of you before, but as you might know, the Treasurer is relatively new to the housing space. So thank you to all of the experts on the line for both being so welcoming and for giving me the information we need in order to try to get some people helped. So Nevada is about to receive the largest infusion of federal money that the state has ever received. And frankly, let's hope it's the largest amount that we ever will receive, because a lot of people had to die to get it, right? So we're getting about $6.6 billion in discretionary and quasi-discretionary. And when I say quasi-discretionary, I mean it's money that can be spent for a certain sort of purpose, but we have a little bit of control over it. There are 93 different buckets of funding coming through the American Rescue Plan that we have identified so far. That doesn't include the 37 buckets from the consolidated plan, the December bill, if you will, and however many buckets could show up in the American Jobs Plan. There are a lot of buckets. Of those 93 buckets, we have information about 49 of them. We have no information about 44. And of those 49, we have actual guidance for less than 20. So the point of the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework, and the point of me sharing all that, is because this is going to be deeply complicated. And that's why we know that the really important thing to do is to get as many stakeholders at the table and to let experts be experts, right? And I think we all looked at the CARES Act funding and the focus that was put on the coronavirus relief funds, that really flexible pool of money in the $840 million range. And that was difficult. Guidance kept shifting. We would get new information every day. We would try to make plans and then find out that the federal treasury had not just said that we could spend the money on something that we didn't know about, but had now said that we couldn't spend the money on the thing we had already spent the money on. And so that was a lot of last year. And that process wasn't as collaborative as it could have been or as it should have been because of the circumstances in the middle of the pandemic and with everything else on everyone's plates. And frankly, the historic lack of resources that Nevada has from a strategic planning perspective. The Every Nevadan Recovery Framework is our deep, deep commitment to making sure that we do this better, because we're not going to have a chance to do it again. And so in the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework, which the governor and I, along with legislative leadership, put together, we identify certain priorities and a certain way that we're going to go through spending this money. And the reason I mention all those different buckets and all those different dollars is that we want to make sure that we're spending money in the most effective way. We want to make sure that we're using general fund dollars when we need to in order to maximize the match that we could get. We want to make sure that we're not spending more restrictive or less restrictive dollars on things where more restrictive dollars could be used, right? There are housing buckets. There's a homeowner assistance fund, which will put about $120 million into the state. And I know Administrator Aycroft is on the line later on, and Steve is deeply, I'll keep going, smarter than me on this. But we've gotten 12 million of that 120 million so far. That's the first 10%. We got to put a plan together for the rest. And that's a big difference between this bucket of money and the money that showed up last year. It seems that Treasury and the White House and everybody else we're talking to in the federal government is really focused on a plan. They want to make sure that there's a plan in place. They want to make sure that stakeholders are at the table. They want to make sure that this money is being spent for the purpose that it was legislatively approved for. So we're going to make sure that money is going to the places where it needs to go and that we're using funds in the most effective way possible. But we also know that decisions on the right future for the state shouldn't come out of a room with 5 or 6 people at it in Carson City. It should come out of all sorts of rooms. Much like any other household, we're going to look at figuring out what our first expenses are. And the governor outlined some of these yesterday, but it's things like making sure that our savings account is back full, right? That we fix the rainy day fund, making sure that we're able to reverse some of the cuts that need to be reversed from the special sessions, right? I mean, we really made very difficult cuts at the state level, and that affected all sorts of programs, right? Education, housing, it affected mental health and other health related services. It affected basically every part of government. We want to make sure we can unwind them. We also know that there's certain things that we don't need to get a whole room of people together to decide that the state needs to fix it. And a good example of that is the DETR system, right? We know that the unemployment system is a mess. We know it needs to be replaced. It's not a fix, it's a replace. And so we're going to work with the legislature to make sure we can get that done. But beyond that, we need to get people in the room who are experts to help us figure out what the solution is. And I think one of our friends in the federal delegation and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and they said it best. We don't want to have 30 plans for housing. We want to have one plan for housing with 30 parts. We want to make sure that those parts are all working together. We also want to make sure that we're working together with cities and counties around the state who are receiving funds directly to make sure that our efforts are complementary and not duplicative. So direct you all to Google, and we can probably, Christine will help me send the link out to everybody, but the link to the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework, which serves as our lodestone for how we're going to spend this money. We mentioned different bands of prioritization, and this speaks to the Every Nevadan part of it. Thank you, Christine. And that's focusing on basic needs first, right? Making sure that people have food and shelter, making sure that housing instability is being addressed. And then to community, making sure that we have educational access, making sure that we have the community support we need. Then the economy, right? What can we use in these funds to support small businesses? We've had some success there with the Pandemic Emergency Technical Support Grant Program, or PETS, which has put $100 million back into the pockets of small businesses at a time they need it the most. And then finally, quality of life. What are the ways that we can use this money to create real generational transformational change? How can we fix things that have broken for so long? How can we make sure that we're building the Nevada that we all want to live in? And so that's kind of the order of priorities. But the way we're going to get ideas, the way we're going to work through it is sort of new for government. And it's new for government because communication is hard, right? Stakeholder engagement is hard. The more people you have at the table, the harder it is to manage the process. And so sometimes when time is short and resources aren't plenty, we make the easier decision, which is to just make a decision. But we know that that's not going to give us the best result. And so the governor outlined a couple of strategic priorities. There are 7 of them. I'll go through them really briefly and then talk about next steps. One is increasing access to healthcare and community-based services. The next is strengthening public education and supporting disadvantaged communities, strengthening Nevada's workforce, supporting small businesses and revitalizing the state's economy, investing in infrastructure, modernizing and enhancing government services, and addressing budget shortfalls. The framework only works if we have direct input from Nevada, experts in the field, people who live in communities who want to fix a thing. And to that end, we've set up, and this is sort of strange for government, but we've set up effectively a submission form. You tell us where we should be focused. And then for the first time, the government's actually going to take those ideas, and instead of just taking some and not taking others, we're going to work with experts in certain fields. We're going to take all those ideas and break them into sections, right? Here's the housing group. Here's the education group. Here's the small business support group. We'll We'll bring experts to the table and we'll go through those ideas. We're also going to use some of this 6.6 billion to support a robust strategic office so that we have some temporary support. Government's pretty small here in Nevada. So we have some temporary support to help flesh out these ideas, right? So one of the ideas that came in, and it's not housing related, but I'll express it because I think it says the thing pretty easily. There was somebody living in Laughlin. And they said, hey, in order to get a COVID test or in order to get my vaccine, I had to go across the river. I had to go across the Colorado and end up in Bullhead City, Arizona. I don't want to do that. That doesn't feel right for a town as big as Laughlin. Okay. So there are 93 buckets of potential funding that we could use to figure out how to put a federally qualified health center down there. And we also have to work with folks in the community and folks in public and private philanthropy, excuse me, to make sure that there's long-term funding for these ideas. And that's a really important piece of what we're doing. I see Miles Dixon's on the line from Grant Lab, and he's been working on this for a long time. We need to build the infrastructure to make sure that we don't take this one-time money and create long-term obligations that then don't have funding. So please take a look at the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework. Please look at the different stakeholder forums. We've already gotten hundreds of ideas from Nevadans, ranging from I've got a pothole outside my house to here's an idea to revolutionize how we can build affordable housing here in Nevada. We want to hear all of them, and then we're going to flesh them out. And we're going to be talking to this group a lot to make sure that we do the hard thing, right? And the governor said this yesterday, and I'll leave you with this. Every time Nevada has had a downturn, we get to this fork in the road. We get to this moment where things are starting to get better. And we're there, right? We have a very good economic forum number. We're seeing gaming numbers rise. People are getting back to work. And then your government makes a choice to enjoy the good times and worry about the things that are enjoyable, right? To go back to ribbon cuttings and high fives and talk about Nevada and how great a place it is. Or we can do the hard work and fix the systems that have been broken since the state was created. We're choosing the latter. We're going to need your help to do it. So thanks for having us. I appreciate the work that you're all doing. And Christine, again, as always, we appreciate your leadership.
Thank you so much, Treasurer. We really appreciate your assistance and support in all of this. It's a tremendous undertaking, we know, and it's good to hear that the state is going to do the hard work. And we want you to know we're there with you to help get that done for sure. Before we dive into the American Rescue Plan and some of its facets, one of the important pieces is understanding better our current landscape, and in particular, the distribution of the largest bucket of funds for housing assistance during the pandemic, the CARES Housing Assistance Program, or CHAP, which has been our emergency rental assistance program. We believe it's important that we all understand how much has been distributed to Nevada so far, and also that we begin to analyze the distribution relative to those Nevadans most in need. We're very pleased to welcome two special guests to talk about this morning. First up is Steve Acroft, the administrator for the Nevada Housing Division, one of our key partners and a true friend to housing. Steve is not just a bureaucrat, he really is a housing proponent and does a great job in making the most of Nevada's housing resources. So Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Bill. And thanks to the Nevada Housing Coalition for allowing me to speak here. So just to do a quick review of where we are right now. The treasurer mentioned a number of buckets. 3 buckets currently exist or have existed for rental assistance that the division is involved in. And that was the original funding provided in the CARES Act. The state of Nevada, along with Clark County and some other local jurisdictions, decided that a portion of that money that was passed immediately after the onset of the pandemic should be used for rental assistance. The second bucket is the ERA. I'll refer to it as ERA 1, that's Emergency Rental Assistance 1, and that was passed at the Consolidation Appropriations Act in December. The third bucket is ERA 2, which was recently passed in the American Rescue Plan in March. So those are the 3 distinct buckets that we will be using for rental assistance. So what have we used? In the initial allocation of the CRF funds, $30 million was allocated by the state to support rental assistance statewide. That was combined with additional CRF funds that were provided by local jurisdictions, including Clark County, Las Vegas, Reno, Washoe County, Henderson, North Las Vegas. And it was all funneled through 3 entities. And that was Clark County Social Services, the Reno Housing Authority, and the Nevada Rural Housing Authority. And we established that very, very early on. And what it actually allowed us to do was to create a framework through this collaborative process that really, maybe not by design, but certainly it's worked out that way, provides a very, very efficient distribution of funds across the state. So of that 30 million allocated by the state, 29.1 was actually distributed to renters throughout Nevada. Actually landlords throughout Nevada on behalf of their renters. That's an important distinction. So that program basically has now gone by the wayside. There are additional CRF funds that are still in the state, but when we pass the other 2 emergency rental assistance provisions, we now had 2 separate buckets of money that we could potentially access for rental assistance that didn't exist prior. So the rental assistance that currently is being administered by these same 3 agencies is under ERA 1. And $208 million was provided to the state in total. The state allocation was 124 million. The balance of the 84 million went to the local jurisdictions, most of which I just rattled off. With this collaboration and with that kind of framework of Clark County Social Services, Reno Housing, and Nevada Rural, all the local jurisdiction funding that was provided in ERA 1 has now been added to those agencies. So now that actual 208 million number is being brought through the same distribution channels. ERA 2, which was recently passed in March, I will go over that in the next segment. So we'll hold off on that. But what I wanted to bring out to everybody was the total of rental assistance provided to landlords throughout this program is over $88 million. Total of utility assistance provided is over $24 million, resulting in combined assistance for over 25,000 households. And if there are folks in the audience looking for rental assistance, I advise you to go to our homepage, housing.nv.gov, where that will direct you to the 3 agencies that are dealing with the rental assistance. And that, in a nutshell, is sort of where we sit currently. And I'll toss it back to you, Bill.
Thank you, Steve. Great rundown on that. And I really appreciate your emphasis on getting that money to landlords. Sometimes that gets lost in the messaging that this money really is to not only support tenants, but to support those landlords out there. And we want to make sure that is a part of our message as we go forward. So thank you for that information. To talk about the work that's being done to understand the distribution of these CHAP funds and how it compares to what the real need is. We're working on a statewide map with the Gwynn Center and hope to have that availability by the end of the month. But in the meantime, we're very appreciative of the work of the Gwynn Center, one of Nevada's premier policy and research institutes. The Gwynn Center is a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan, independent research center focused on fact-finding or fact-based, relevant, and well-reasoned analysis of critical policy issues facing Nevada and the Intermountain West. So with that, I'll turn it over to Meredith Levine and Dan Leiden of the Gwynn Center. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Christine. Really appreciate you having us here today to talk about these findings, which we're really excited about and looking forward to sharing with the group. I want to stay actually on the title slide before I go to kind of the main event here, because I think the main event is going to be exciting, but I do think that there's some preliminary items to discuss really briefly first. And that is, so for the group, Christine came to us and said, here is this map out of Philadelphia. And what they did is they used some index from the Urban Institute and they put it side by side with how much money from rental assistance was going to those areas that were prioritized for need. And, you know, in Philadelphia, it turns out that there was maybe what we would call a misallocation of resources. And we said, look, we would love to examine what that looks like in Nevada, but we certainly, you know, are not here to look for failure. What we're trying to do with a map like this is say, for local providers, for agencies, for anyone who might be looking, our goal is to get dollars to communities in needs. If there's an issue, we can always assess it. If it's good, that's good. We can build on that moving forward, but it's really just another tool in the toolbox. And that's where data can be just enormously effective. And so what we did was we started out by pulling together a very preliminary analysis. As Bill said, we're looking to create a statewide map. So we have reached out to Reno Housing Authority and to, of course, the Rural Division as well to obtain these numbers. But right now we have some data from the CARES Housing Assistance Program, or CHAP, from Clark County. And what we did was we took that data and we zoomed in on Las Vegas because that's what we were able to do basically in the time frame, but also so that we could be really precise as possible with what we were trying to do as just a very preliminary showcasing. And so again, that statewide map is forthcoming, but for the moment, we have this zoom on Las Vegas, and we also did that side by side with the Urban Institute. So if we could move to those side by side panels, I would love to walk through what's in those with you. So what you're seeing is, again, as I said, side by side. So the panel on the left is this composite index from the Urban Institute. And what it is picking up is a number of indicators, I think there's about 11, that show high priority rental needs. So as that map gets darker, what you're seeing is those are the areas of greatest need. And what is in that index, again, I don't want to walk through all 11. We could certainly talk about it if you have questions, but I'll just name a few. So what this is showing is, again, within this composite, so it's people living in poverty, severely cost-burdened low-income renters, high overcrowding, high unemployment, adults without health insurance, and low-income jobs lost to COVID-19. So again, you see that that's really picking up that sort of high priority rental need. And it's, according to the Urban Institute, through kind of an equity lens, which is something that, you know, we are having more and more conversations about that are very, very important, obviously. And I will just take a moment and say that the Urban Institute says, you know, don't look across states. So we're not going to do that. And don't look at just our data. To Treasurer Conine's point, need is also learned from the bottom up, from experts and stakeholders. And so this is sort of a very, you know, rough graphic of where that need is, but certainly service providers on the ground have a better idea. Now, if we look at that right side panel, this is data that was provided to us with or from courtesy of Clark County Social Service. It is the CHAP program, and it's from the start of fiscal 2021 to April 27th. So I believe that that was last week. And what it shows, again, as the map becomes more deeply shaded, it's the percentage of households that have received aid. So, you know, you get to that, say, over 4%, for example. That means that those areas received more. And if you, again, there's no great way visually or data-wise to overlay the two maps, but you really see sort of an analogous representation here, which is that the areas of greatest need in Las Vegas, by and large, receive the greatest share of aid. And I think that that just speaks to the amazing work that's been done to really ensure that communities in need are getting the rental assistance that has been very much demanded in this very specific emergency situation. But it's of course not just a short-term proposition. So again, I mean, you know, taking stock, let's sit in the present and, you know, appreciate this, because it's really, the distribution is really great to see. It's, you know, that again, comparability across the maps is exciting, and it shows that the dollars are going to where they need to go. But I think that we're all really aware that we're coming up on a critical juncture. And that critical juncture is the statewide moratorium, as I believe it will expire at the end of this month, and then the CDC, which is the federal moratorium, that will expire 30 days after, so at the end of June. So once those moratoria expire, we're going to need to be looking at how those dollars again get to those communities and what that's going to look like. Because we all know that as some of the procedural changes happened across the different moratoria, that there were some hiccups in that process. That's very understandable, but it's something that, again, to Treasurer Kona's point, we want to be forward-looking and not run into those obstacles again. And so how do we think through this continued and sustained effort to get the dollars where there's going to be a situation where that moratorium won't be there for high need renters? And that's something to consider. So the call here, the clarion call that I would make is, it actually does come down to data collection, and that data collection needs to be rigorous. Now, there is no requirement. I haven't talked about some of the limitations in our data. You know, that's very weedy. I could certainly answer those questions. There are limitations. For example, the map on the right is at the zip code level. The map on the left is at the census tract level. You know, there are reasons for that. We would not suggest that anybody who's a service provider goes through a process of collecting data at the census tract level, because that would be pretty much impossible. But zip code is not a required field. To the extent possible, as a best practice, to ask a client who comes in and say, hey, you know, could you tell us your zip code or your last zip code? That will continue to fortify the process so that you know where those dollars are going and that they're getting into the right hands. Now, it's the same thing. You want to ask questions like, well, you know, as a client, how many members of the family are there? And so that way we know, you know, is there a difference between client level data and family level data? Those sorts of questions, again, they're not, some are required, the zip code is not required, but the fact of it is that to sustain the efforts, you need that data tracking and then that ability to tailor the intervention. I want to close briefly with our final main slide, which is sort of thinking through the long-term implications, that sort of investment, longer funding strategy that we're going to hear more about, that we've already heard a bit about. What this graph is actually showing is something historical. And what you see is that at the highest moment of unemployment, eviction rate is actually lowest. And part of that are those protections that are put in by the federal government, by the states, those dollars that come through, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the ARRA dollars, those come through. And in the moment of crisis and in the couple years after the crisis, there are real protections in place. But ultimately, those dollars fade if you don't have a strategy for using them, sustaining them in an infrastructure that supports them. And so we, as Treasurer Kona said, cannot afford to have something where the eviction rate has a lagged effect and then it starts to spike down the road once we get into those post-recovery type dollars that we're going to see in the American Recovery Plan start to flow through the state. And so we want to be really clear and mindful that this is a continuing conversation, but all stakeholders need to be present and engaged for those long-term efforts and to work with those 93 buckets of dollars to avoid the sort of lag crisis that we saw in the previous, which was the Great Recession. And with that, I will stop and be happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you, Meredith. Appreciate that great information and all the work that you and the Gwynn Center do for Nevada.
Thank you.
I've been remiss in not mentioning questions. If you have questions, please put them into the chat. We probably won't have time to address all questions, but we'll do what we can today. And if there are questions we can't get to today, we will certainly communicate with you through email so that we can answer your questions going forward. So thank you very much. With that, we'll go ahead and talk about some information that is really not typical in the housing world, a preview of new additional financial resources designated for housing, and also potential resources with flexibility that can be used for housing. Treasurer Conine mentioned some of these coming on to the webinar this morning. It's very exciting to consider the prospect of that. Obviously, there's some that we know and a lot that we don't know so far, but let's talk about what we do know. The next guest that we're bringing to you, we ask you to be curious, be bold, and imagine Nevada actually addressing our extreme affordable housing shortage. Our first guest is new to the Nevada Housing Coalition, but wow, has the team at Nevada Grant Lab really come to the table for housing. Their assistance has been incredible, and we look forward to continuing this important partnership. Nevada Grant Lab supports nonprofit organizations and their government partners to access and administer federal grants that benefit Nevadans. With that, I'll turn it over to Miles Dixon and Mike Vanozzi to tell us about some of that work and the opportunities that are available to us. Gentlemen.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity, and thanks for the really kind introduction, Bill. First, just to start off, my name is Miles Dixon. I'm the program director at Nevada Grant Lab. I'm joined by Michael Vanozzi, one of my colleagues and one of our many partners at the Grant Lab, who's working with, as Bill said, nonprofits and government partners throughout the state to access federal funding, particularly federal grants that benefit Nevadans. As many of you are probably painfully familiar, Nevada has a pretty poor track record in getting our fair share of federal resources, whether that's in housing or education or workforce or jobs. Count the ways Nevada is getting shortchanged and Nevadans are getting shortchanged in terms of the benefits that we already paid for, but don't ultimately receive in terms of federal grant revenue loss. So it's exciting to join here. I will give the quick disclaimer, as Bill said, new to the housing the coalition as well as the conversation. So pardon me for not being an expert in it quite yet, or maybe I'll never get there, but we're gonna do our best today. Christine asked us to a pretty tall order, I think, which was help describe the American Rescue Plan. And I think we have 12 minutes and counting. So I'm gonna get started. As I do that, I wanna offer a frame for where we are today. As you all know, a crisis unlike anything we've seen, but not our first crisis here in Nevada. And all of it happens against a backdrop of decades of underinvestment as a state in the very things that would have helped us weather this storm, relieve and bring relief to folks at a moment they most need it, and really set a course for recovery. And so by that infrastructure, whether it's affordable housing or what I think of as federal grants infrastructure, so the adequate technology as well as personnel to successfully identify, manage, and administer federal funds for the benefit of Nevadans. It's really, really exciting to follow the conversation or follow Treasurer Conine and Steve and Meredith talking about the vision and the commitment the state has, especially from the treasurer and the governor and legislative leadership around getting the American Rescue Plan right, if you will, making the most impact, the most economic and humanitarian benefit of this program for Nevadans, and really to the Gwynn Center for bringing data, paired with community engagement. I think data and the sort of vision and framework that the state is articulating right now really sets us on course for the sort of impact that I think so many of us have wanted for so long here in Nevada. And a final comment before I get into the rescue plan. While we are talking about trillions and billions and hundreds of millions, make no mistake that the $1 billion or $2 billion that Nevada will essentially have as excess cash flow, money that we get to make long-term choices with. $1 billion or $2 billion will not fix decades of underinvestment, but what it is an opportunity to do is start seeding the sort of investments that pay off in the long term. And I think that's what's so exciting about the Housing Coalition bringing everybody together today. So on to the next slide. I'm going to offer some really quick context for the American Rescue Plan, historical context. Then I'm going to talk about what at a general level it may mean to Nevada. And then I'll turn it over to Mike to talk more about housing and what the opportunity ahead looks like for us. The American Rescue Plan, $1.9 trillion. Thanks to the Tax Foundation for their really great graphic. I'm not going to try to give you a short shrift of what $1.9 trillion may pay for, but let me instead offer some historical context. Where we're at right now with the American Rescue Plan follows, it's the third stimulus package following CARES and the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And we're now closing in on $6 trillion of spending in less than 12 months, or at least committed expenditures in less than 12 months. That makes the American Rescue Plan, that even makes the Great New Deal following the Great Depression pale in comparison. What we're talking about here is an amount of spending that this country, this state, and our community has really never seen. And all indications show that this won't be the last package. We know that there will be some version of an American Jobs Plan that passes. We know that there will be continued expenditures that support relief and recovery efforts. And we know all of this sits on top of the $800 billion that the federal government every single year disperses to states and communities across the country to pay for programs, projects, and services that benefit Americans. So what we're talking about is historical in proportion, but in the context of where we are right now, CARES was really functionally a relief package, right? If we think back to CARES, it provided flexible funding in terms of the Coronavirus Relief Fund, but the real dollars of CARES were about immediate assistance, whether it was around vaccination and health or rebate checks. The Consolidated Appropriations Act moved us closer to something that we may think of as recovery spending, dollars that are focused on helping communities reopen and get folks back to work. The American Rescue Plan really is the first recovery-oriented stimulus package that we're seeing out of this, out of COVID stimulus dollars. This package is longer in terms of the timeline it has. Some aspects will go out all the way 4 years. It's much more flexible than what we've seen previously, and it's also much more comprehensive. Not just in terms of what it will help cover and what it will help pay for, but it's much more comprehensive in terms of who will get funded. The the CARES package with the Coronavirus Relief Funds directed the CRF, really just to a small handful here in Nevada of local governments and states. So the state of Nevada got an appropriation, Clark County got an appropriation, and the city of Las Vegas got an appropriation. Under the American Rescue Plan state and local fiscal recovery program, which will provide $4.1 billion to state and local governments, there will be over 60 prime recipients in the state. That's different than what we saw last time, right? We saw 3 effectively. This time we see more than 60 different entities receiving funding directly, in some cases, from the feds, bypassing state government. And as the treasurer pointed out, it's coming from 90 different programs, only about 20 of which we have really clear guidance on right now. So the complexity, the breadth, as well as the timeline for the American Rescue Plan is something that not only have we not seen compared to the CARES Act or the Consolidated Appropriations Act, it's not something we've ever seen in American history or in the state of Nevada's history. So the response to dealing with it has to also be something that we've never seen before. So again, I'm excited that we're having this conversation. We're excited to join it. I want to take one more final moment before I turn it over to Mike and flip to our next slide and talk about what we think it looks like in Nevada from a number standpoint. Early estimates, and again, I really want to underscore early estimates. They're sourced from multiple different reference points, whether it's federal agencies or wonderful national data sources like federal funds information for the state or local economists in the state itself. Nevada looks to be receiving almost $12.5 billion. Now, a lot of that is direct rebates, right? Checks in the mail, as well as tax credit rebates to folks. A huge sum of that, 1.6 billion, goes to unemployment. Another 1.5 billion goes to education, K-12 and higher ed. And so ultimately what we're looking at is, again, an amount of funding that is flowing that Nevada really hasn't seen before, but also critically to a number of recipients that Nevada has never really contemplated in terms of administering or coordinating this sort of federal funding. One thing I really want to hone in on, because I think the audience includes lots of nonprofits, is that the state and local governments will be receiving what we think of as recovery funds, or what are termed recovery funds, dollars that are intended to help stabilize their operations so they can get back to serving the services and programs that Nevadans rely on that help create equity and opportunity for Nevadans. Who is not receiving those direct dollars is nonprofits. Fortunately, the federal government has provided a great amount of latitude based on what we've seen so far to allow prime recipients, the state, local government, school districts, institutions of higher education, to subgrant dollars down to nonprofits who are doing the frontline service delivery. So again, I really want to underscore here a huge amount of funding, a huge amount of flexibility, a longer timeline, and also an opportunity to really move money, if we have a strategy and a coordinated plan, to the organizations and partners that are doing work on the ground. And I think for those of you who are nonprofit leaders on this conference call, know Nevada is not a huge direct service provider in a way that maybe other states are. We rely on nonprofits in this state to provide direct services at a scale that I think is unique in this country, maybe at the very least unique among the West. When I think about the reliance, if you will, that we have on nonprofit partners, it's extraordinary. And when you think about the relief work that has been done in the last 12 months, when you think about folks who walk through the door of a food pantry, that food pantry is run by most likely a nonprofit. When we think about folks who are calling a home, have a place to call home, safe, stable housing, we think of providers who are in the nonprofit space often, right? When we think about folks who are sheltering or providing healthcare, we often think of nonprofit partners. And so I do think one of the critical opportunities for the state as we move forward is thinking about not just who's getting money now, but who should those dollars ultimately flow to, and what should be our expectations in terms of outcomes and transparency and strategy. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike to talk a little bit more about the housing specific aspects of the American Rescue Plan. And thanks again so much for having me and Mike and Nevada Grant Lab today.
Thank you very much, Miles. And I really appreciate working with you all through this. Christine, can we go to the next slide? So to quote Joe Biden in another piece of legislation, ARP is a BFD. It is a very, very large package. I know that's been talked about, but we've never seen this sort of support from the feds before. I will put it in this lens. It's critical that we get it right, not just on the state or the county. It's not just on the state and the county to get this right. It's everyone's responsibility to try and do the best thing for housing insecure Nevadans. Now, I think many of you know, historically, Nevada invests a very small amount of its own funds in housing. We have always had a need for federal funds, but now with the never before seen dollars from our housing coming our way and dollars that could be used for housing in other buckets, how are we going to be strategic with that money? So I think that this list probably is not unfamiliar to some of you, but some of this funding from ARP and from the other packages has already been announced. So you may have already seen the emergency rental assistance that Steve talked about earlier, homeowner assistance funds, 121 million. Home investment partnership grants were just announced. So 30.6 million in entitlement to local governments, and another 6.5 million non-entitlement to states. But we also have funds that don't just come from HUD, don't just come from Treasury, but we also have funds coming from other government agencies like FEMA with the pandemic emergency assistance funds, or I'm sorry, the emergency food and shelter program funds. And we have funds coming from the Department of Education, through the school district, through the state education agencies for homeless children and youth. In addition, I think it's hugely important to not, so that's a lot of money that I just went through, but it's hugely important to not let the shiny object in front of us obscure the other opportunities for competitive funding. These other grants below on the bottom part of the slide are things that we know are coming because we read the law. So housing counseling program funds are in ARPA. Capital project funds. This is going to be a really, really big pot of money. Over $100 million is probably going to come to the state, and it's going to be used for capital projects. It's thought to be, earmarked mostly for rural areas. It's thought to be earmarked mostly for, infrastructure. But how can we use this sort of things? HOPWA for people with HIV and AIDS, housing for people with HIV and AIDS. There's additional flexibilities in CDBG that the counties can use. There's a lot of potential here. Grant Lab, in our role, we're here to help with those. We're here with a housing deficit as large as we have. It's my opinion that we shouldn't just be happy with the already announced awards, which is more money than we've seen come into this community in a long time. We should not leave any opportunity on the table. It's competitive funding for nonprofit organizations, local government, state government, that they can go after and competitively address some of the issues that we're facing. Now, I know I've talked to many, many people in the couple of months that I've been working for Grant Lab. I know that federal programs are a pain to administer, and that's an understatement. But let's come together and figure out what we can do to relieve some of that pain. Grant Lab is here to help. If Grant Lab can be a partner in helping to find solutions here, our ears are open. The big opportunity with state and local recovery funds, flexible use, they have flexible use. They have more than enough money to plug budget holes there, but there's going to be a big conversation on how best to use them. The state, like the treasurer said, is soliciting ideas for their recovery funds, but we should also make sure that the counties, the cities, and those 60 other agencies that received recovery funds money are included in that conversation, maybe separately, but we need to solicit conversations with them. Christine, can we go to the next slide? So we all know the huge problems we face. The Housing Division publishes a dashboard of where we are every year. A deficit of more than 105,000 units of affordable housing. We have limited tools and resources available to develop more housing. Just this session, many of you supported the affordable housing bill, and we're disappointed with the death of that linkage fee bill. I understand that's frustrating, but we have to move forward. We have to move forward with the tools that we have. Miles and I have worked in the legislature for a long time. And as you know, a lot of these bills that don't get passed, they usually get turned into studies. There's been no shortage of those. Housing advocates and our friends at the state government and legislature have not let those studies sit and gather dust on the shelf. A lot of those recommendations have been implemented. But now I think we should ask ourselves, now that we have these resources from the feds, what's worth going back to? What's worth revisiting from those studies? The treasurer is going to solicit a lot of background from a lot of people, but also, the state legislature and the state have paid for a lot of these studies to already be done. So maybe we can pull some ideas from here. I was, for one, I was on the state policy council on homelessness for a time. We talked about Medicaid reimbursement and state low income tax credit. In 2019, the state low income tax credit moved forward. What did we learn from that? How can we make it better? You know, I read through lots of these reports for these presentations, and one thing I noticed, sometimes we shy away from thinking big in these sort of interim settings. We've already been shot down to a study sometimes. Now that study can only contemplate certain things that don't cost much money, or else it'll get shot down too. So, you know, read these studies, revisit these studies with an eye towards, okay, what happened during that 2017, during that 2019 interim, you know, and how is the debate that was happening there affecting how I look at it today? There's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of creative uses for ARP funding that we can do. Really, you know, I think that there is a great opportunity to address some of the things that we already know, you know, would be effective. So one other thing that I want to just make sure that everyone is very, very clear on, these are one-shot dollars. So we don't anticipate that they will be used or that they will exist after the recovery, or I'm sorry, the rescue plan is fully spent out. They're probably not going to increase the federal budget to that level, you know, after this recovery is complete. So what can we use one-shot dollars for? Can we use them to build new affordable units? Can we preserve or rehab existing affordable units? Can we find new incentives for owners to convert their units to affordable? Next slide, please. Any way that you slice it, Nevada has gotten a lot of money and will get even more. I know federal money comes with a lot of strings, but I'm going to give some tough guy talk, as an old boss used to say. Federal funding is a pain in the butt, but we need to figure it out. Almost every other state in the country does much better than us at getting and spending federal resources. We can't do that, should disappear from our vocabulary. The grants that we already have been announced can be used for acquiring properties for affordable housing, targeting dollars for preservation, buying down new builds to below 50% of AMI, creating down payment assistance programs for targeted populations to create wealth within communities, using flexibility from local relief funds to purchase or rehab smaller properties that might not work well under normal LIHCC rules. These are things that we've made incremental progress on over the years, but the problem has always been larger than our solutions. Now, I think, is the time to go for big solutions. The county and the cities throughout the state are splitting up more than $1 billion in flexible dollars that can be used to pay, at least in part, for the things that we talked about. And that's not even to mention the state's share of $2.9 billion. And very, very importantly, grants are out there for the winning. There are lots of directions we can take this conversation, but my call to action here for you is this. Governor Sisolak is looking for suggestions on how to spend just a portion of the money that we're getting, the $2.9 billion in state and local relief funds through the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework. This money is just a fraction of what the state and locals are getting and have received from the feds in the past year, but it also represents about 2/3 of our state's general fund in any given year. So what are the 3 or 4 ideas that related to housing that this group can all sign on to? How can we work with our partners in the state to advance policies that will move us forward? If we ever want this opportunity again, we're going to have to work together. We must perform well. We must, leave no stone unturned, but we also must collaborate, and we must not go off on our own and try to do something that we think is cool. We've got to work together. And I really, really appreciate Christine, your team, the board of the Housing Coalition, all the partners for convening this so that we can start to have these conversations. Next slide, Christine. Finally, this is just a general call to work together. We here at Nevada Grant Lab, we're a small and mighty team, Miles and I, but also we have a stable of consultants that we make available to opportunities that we think are reasonable, and if we can fill the gap, if you need a grant writer, if you need some technical assistance, if you need to find something that you're having trouble finding and applying for a federal grant, let's work together. Let's figure this out together. We have our website, nevadagrantlab.org, has a lot of resources on it. You can make a technical assistance request. Let's talk. Let's ID opportunities that you might want to go after, not just the opportunities that the state already has and the locals already have, but other opportunities to build or rehab or preserve or serve more populations through competitive grants. Let's work together. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to listen to us today. And Miles and I are available for any questions.
Thank you so much, Miles and Mike, for a great overview. It's almost scary how much money's coming at us and what a responsibility we have to use it well. So I'm grateful for that information, and hopefully we can rise to the challenge. We're going to be talking about that a little more as we go along. Right now, I want to take it back to the Housing Division and Steve Acroth to talk about some of the housing funds that we know are coming down the pike and what might be happening with those. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that presentation. Miles and Mike, it's great information. Covered a lot, quite frankly, of what I was going to discuss. So my part of this will be brief. Basically, want to talk about the funds coming into the state that the state actually has some purview over. And as I mentioned, there's the first one is ERA 2, so ERA Rental Assistance 2, and as was indicated previously, while we have an estimate of what we think is coming in, this program is bifurcated, and one of the buckets, if you will, is additional funding for high needs grantees, and that's about $2.1 billion, if memory serves, on the federal level. And that high need grantee is defined by the level of assistance evidenced by the number of very low income households in grantees' jurisdictions, paying more than 50% of their income on rent, living in substandard or overcrowded conditions, rental market costs, and employment trends. And as we all know, the Las Vegas Valley really does check an awful lot of those boxes. So as anticipated, we will see additional funding, hopefully in upwards of the $164 million that was indicated previously, from that source. And to let everybody know, the funds that come in through this program are available until September 30th of 2025, and that's going to be a key date for all the programs I'm about to talk about. The second is the Homeowner Assistance Fund, previously mentioned, $121 million in homeowner assistance. This is specifically for current homeowners and has a number of uses, including mortgage assistance, principal reduction, mortgage rate reductions, utilities, insurance, and HOA fees to avoid foreclosure. So that funding is just now arriving at the state. And again, that goes through September 30th of 2025. And then the last thing I really want to touch on, as indicated previously, was the homeless assistance and supportive services under home. That's $37 million statewide. That's way more than we ever get in any one particular calendar year. So some creative things can potentially be used for that until September 30th, 2025. But those funds are used to be specific to create affordable housing and service for people who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. So with that very, very quick overview, I'll turn it back to you, Bill.
Thank you, Steve. We really appreciate that. Appreciate your shepherding of those funds for the use of Nevada. We had hoped to address some of the HUD funding and emergency vouchers that'll be coming down the pike. Unfortunately, Tammy Thomas, our HUD representative for Nevada, had a very urgent last-minute matter and is unable to join us today. But we will have some additional information we know coming on that in the near future. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our Executive Director, Christine Hess, who has done a wonderful job of scaring up all of the information that's available and bringing it to us today. Much of this information is really just barely beginning to bubble up and become known to us. And so grateful for Christine and all her work. And now what we need is a call to action and what to do next. Christine?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Bill. And wow, what amazing information. And the Nevada Housing Coalition is really so grateful for its partners, the Treasurer, Nevada Housing Division, the Gwynn Center, Nevada Grant Lab, a new partner for us, but you can see how we rely on information to bring to you. The Nevada Housing Coalition is not the decision maker, but we have many decision makers here. That said, as we listen, and Mike, I heard you loud and clear for the call to action, and the Nevada Housing Coalition is ready. Right now, right before I introduce a very important and ready and poised Brooke Page with Corporation for Supportive Housing, who is going to show us what some of our ARP dollars can do and the difference that they will make here in Nevada, which, by the way, she'll be addressing one of our largest deficits for affordable housing. And we must consider these options as we think about it. I'd like to launch a poll. So everybody who's on, Katie, hopefully you can launch that for me. Let me know if you can't, because I will launch it. Awesome. So you should see in front of you 3 questions, and it's really to get you thinking. And if you don't see the poll, or if you would rather you have other thoughts, please put your responses in the chat. But essentially, we're wanting to know, how do you think Nevada should prioritize ARP funds for housing? And we're going to hear from Brooke Page. She has thoughts on how we can prioritize ARP funds for housing. But it's just the start of a conversation. And the Nevada Housing Coalition is going to depend on its members and experts to put together a comprehensive housing plan that's strategic and long-lasting, that we're going to put forward to our leadership, the treasurer, the governor, the legislature, around the uses of ARP funds for housing. So your answers today are very important. By the way, that first question, you can put more than one response. I think a lot of them you can. The second question is also very important. How do you want to see state and local governments and other ARP funding recipients solicit your input for the use of funds relative to housing especially? By the way, if you think these questions are good, thank you, Miles Dixon from Nevada Grant Lab, for helping out. And isn't that funny? We had one of our local governments ask this very question in the chat this morning. So they are listening to you, and we are going to be getting back to them. How would you like that to be? And I did see in the chat, Jessica, at the end of every Nevada Recovery Framework that Katie posted the link for in the chat, there's actually a form that you can submit your ideas. Please do, but I also encourage you, if you have a housing idea, to come to the table with the coalition, because we are going to put forward a comprehensive plan that provides evidence-based return on investment for our legislators and leadership. Finally, how can Nevada Housing Coalition help? How do we all connect to better communicate and leverage our ARP funding? So go ahead and respond. I'm going to give you all another 36 seconds or so, and then it's my pleasure to tee up the next conversation. So I'm very lucky to get to work with Brooke Page, and Brooke has been very in tune. Was it 2 months ago, I think, Brooke reached out to me and said, what's Nevada doing with this? This is a big deal. I'm with my partners all around the country, and they are talking about these federal funds. And there is an unbelievable opportunity for Nevada to address one of our greatest deficits. It's my pleasure to introduce Brooke Page with Corporation for Supportive Housing. She serves as the Southwest Director. And Brooke, I do want to just point out, in your presentation, if you can also maybe address supportive housing, because there might be some here who don't understand supportive housing wholly, and explain why it's so important. But another key thing that we should all know about Brooke is Brooke serves on our Housing Advisory Committee. So thank you, Brooke. So she is at the table with state leaders and making some big decisions for us and helping lead the way. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Brooke. Let me just share the screen, Brooke, for you here.
Thank you so much, Christine. What an awesome introduction. And hello, everyone. I am excited, so excited to discuss this. As Christine mentioned, months in the making to be able to kind of pull together some information for our community, because we have this historical investment in the state that I was born and raised in, to invest in permanent housing solutions for our most vulnerable community members, the people experiencing homelessness, those that are at risk of experiencing homelessness, and those that are recently homeless. As Mike mentioned earlier, it is critical that we get this right. So let's dive into how the American Rescue Plan's financial resources can help us address long-term housing solutions like supportive housing as an important resource to our state's recovery. Next slide. So as Christine mentioned, I am the Southwest Director for a national nonprofit called CSH, and we focus on supportive housing and housing as the solution to improve the lives of our most vulnerable people. We also help communities maximize their public resources, which I'm going to describe some strategies today, but our ultimate goal as an organization is to build healthy communities. Next slide. So thank you, Christine, for teeing up. I do want to give you some terminology so we're all on the same footing about what is supportive housing. And so what it is it's affordable housing. So we talk a lot about that with the coalition and in our state, because we need a lot of affordable housing. But also it's the affordable housing is coupled with the support services and the support service providers who are actively engaging with tenants in flexible, voluntary, and comprehensive services that work with our property and our housing management to support tenants to stay stably housed, right? We don't want to get people into housing and then they don't have the resources that they need to stay there, which is a positive community asset for the long term. Community supportive housing is permanent and it's tenant centered. And so what we mean when we say permanent is it's not time limited. As supportive housing is tenant centered, so tenants do have the choice if they want to stay in supportive housing or not, but they have the choice if they want to move on or they can stay. And supportive housing is flexible, it's voluntary, and it provides tenants with the services and the wraparounds that they need to reconnect with their family unification for our child welfare involved families, or our folks that may need access to employment, may need healthcare, may need to stabilize, those Maslow's hierarchy of need. We put them in housing so they can stabilize and address their personal challenges. Supportive housing provides that platform to help tenants thrive. Next slide. Supportive housing is for households who have multiple barriers to accessing housing. It is for people that without the services, they're unable to access and maintain the housing because of things in their background, like possibly evictions or barriers that are keeping them from getting housed. And without the housing, a lot of times they're unable to actually engage in the services that they need to stabilize and get well. Populations that tend to benefit from supportive housing are those folks that are experiencing chronic homelessness, people with chronic mental health challenges or substance use disorders, our families that may have child welfare involvement, people that are exiting the justice system, which I will talk about a little bit here shortly, our transition age youth population, and compared with other very low income folks, these men and women are disproportionately using our shelters, our emergency health care, our public mental health services, often at rapidly aggressive rates, and costing our taxpayers a lot of resources. But supportive housing can break that cycle by providing affordable housing and the services that these individuals need to remain stably housed. Next slide. So Mike referenced Nevada's 105,000 affordable housing deficit that the state needs. And I would love to narrow in on kind of what that supportive housing subset of that affordable housing need is. So on your screen, you'll notice, according to CSH's national need data, which covers 16 critical systems, Nevada has an estimated need for supportive housing of roughly 7,800 units. And that's to address the folks that I mentioned earlier. So you'll notice on your screen, the highest populations that are in need of this supportive housing in Nevada are the people that are exiting our institutional stays in the justice system, and our unaccompanied youth, our transition age youth, and households who are experiencing homelessness. Next slide. CSH also developed a racial disparities and disproportionality index tool that looks at 16 unique systems and measures whether a particular race or a particular ethnicity group is represented in a particular system, is proportionate to, is it over, or is it below that population's representation in the overall population of the community, also known as proportionality. We also examine systemic differences between these groups and geographies. And in Nevada, you will notice that Black people are overrepresented at 5 times higher rates than the general population in every single system, along with American Indian, Alaska Native, and Hispanic Latinx populations are also overrepresented. Next slide. The COVID-19 pandemic has illuminated the importance that housing is healthcare. Non-congregate housing was critical to reduce the spread of the virus. And we see the health benefits when a person has a roof, when they can stabilize in a safe environment, and then focus on their personal needs like the physical health, their behavioral health, or increasing their income. We have an opportunity, and we cannot have a scarcity mindset with this opportunity, with the American Rescue Plan, to seed supportive housing developments in Nevada. Demonstrate the evidence that this supportive housing is an evidence-based practice, and we can demonstrate the effectiveness to make the case to scale this intervention to address the daunting need that you saw in the previous slides. Next slide. As Mr. Acroft articulated earlier, we have new HUD, homeless assistance and supportive service resources that do not expire until September 30th of 2030. The eligible uses of these resources are for the target population we discussed today. These resources are exciting tools in our state's toolbox. To make them even better, we must consider pairing them with other resources. Next slide. 3 legs of the proverbial supportive housing stool are the resources needed from capital, operating, and supportive services to make a project pencil. The capital financing is the funding for both the hard and soft costs of new construction and rehabilitation. That includes things like land acquisition and construction costs, which is needed to develop and create new units. The operating sources cover the gap between the cost of operating the building, like the utilities and the property management or the maintenance, and what the tenants can afford to pay in their rent. And the services are the costs of support services for the tenants that they need, the wraparound supports, the case management, the mental health, which sometimes can be provided on-site or off-site. You'll notice multiple funding sources, both temporary recovery resources and annual entitlement allocations provide resources that, when leveraged, can pencil a supportive housing development project. How these projects are situated in a given community can vary, but some options that can be considered are things like integrated housing, where you've got a mix of fair market rate units coupled with deeply affordable subsidized units. Next slide. In order to maximize resources, timing, and prioritize serving the communities that are most in need, these resources must be in alignment. And the eligible uses of 4 different sources within the American Rescue Plan include the HUD homeless assistance and supportive services, emergency housing vouchers, and resources allocated through the state treasury for emergency rental assistance and the state local recovery funds. Leveraged together, notice how a community can develop new units with capital funding, provide the operating reserves with fiscal recovery dollars, and various supportive service options with the HACCP dollars, the emergency housing vouchers, and the emergency rental assistance. A flexible subsidy pool strategy also provides options that can leverage our existing stock by incentivizing landlords through creative strategies. On its own, each funding source is good, but paired and leveraged with other buckets provides the opportunity for impact and collaborative approaches. Next slide. Key stakeholders are important to this opportunity, which has been a consistent theme throughout today's presentations. And the resources that are needed to do that work require having the city and the county, the housing authority, and state agencies who oversee these resources. And to have a comprehensive planning discussion where decisions about allocating resources, developing a joint notice of funding availability, or prioritizing specific populations, folks listed on this screen should be considered, such as our funding and entitlement agencies, which hopefully they have that interest in expanding access to high quality supportive housing. Culturally responsive housing developers who have the capacity and the interest to create quality supportive housing. People with lived expertise to help drive strategy that expands access to supportive housing and shapes quality services, and culturally responsive supportive housing providers who have the interest and the capacity to deliver high quality housing and services. And not on the screen, but a helpful partner is an intermediary like a CSH who can translate between funding streams, sectors, and partners to maximize resources and impact. Next slide. With these key players positioned in a community where there may be opposition, things like NIMBYism or not in my backyard, political dynamics, or advocates who might be posturing for other priorities, it is then that the proverbial three-legged stool that I talked about earlier turns into a full-fledged community table where we can strategize and work together to solve some of our community's most difficult problems. Supportive housing is one of those problems, and I invite you all to have a seat at the table, at a table that I hope is committed, transparent, diverse, and ready with innovative solutions. Next slide. So that's it for my presentation. I'll turn it back over to you, Christine, or Mr. Brewer. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present with you all today.
Wow, that was so awesome. Thank you, Brooke. As we can all see, Brooke's ready. So I'm going to ask Katie if she can please share the results from the polling, because I think we should all see the answers. And I also want to apologize. I do sometimes fail, but today's failure of going a little over time was totally worth it. I hope you all think so too, because the information today was incredible. But yeah, I agree. Strategically allocating and stacking resources, Brooke. I think about Corporation for Supportive Housing, and the Nevada Housing Coalition absolutely wants you at the table as we work forward towards solutions. Additionally, we have the benefit of having Enterprise Community Partners, another national group and well-respected in the affordable housing world, who's here to support Nevada as we look at our housing opportunities for funding. So how do you think Nevada should prioritize ARP funds for housing? We had so many responses, over half of you, well over half of you, 3/4 of you responded. Develop more affordable housing. Yes, we hear you. That's always the key, but let's target that, right? And all of the above get some, but 71%. How do you want to see state and local governments and other ARP funding recipients solicit your input? Through groups like the Nevada Housing Coalition. And at this point, I'd also like to say there are some key stakeholder groups at the table that Nevada Housing Coalition depends on, including the Nevada Homeless Alliance. And Emily couldn't be with us this morning, but she is absolutely at the table and here to represent. And we know because of Emily and her expertise and what she's brought to the table, that homelessness services aren't always targeted in the right way. So we can do it better, and we hope to do that better with ARP funds. Some of that's through supportive housing measures that Brooke mentioned, and there are going to be some other ways. So we look forward to that. And how do we all connect to better communicate and leverage our ARP funding? All of the above. I don't think on this case, there's just no answer, is there? And connecting and communicating is hard. Wouldn't it be better if we all sat down with our little pencils and said, okay, here's what we'd like to do. I just love that the treasurer said that's not what's going to happen. They're making a sincere effort to target our communities and what we need for supportive housing. So I do really appreciate that. I guess that's really it for today. I want to thank everybody. I'm going to put my, Katie, if you don't mind putting my email in the chat for everybody to see. And also I'll put our information up on the table, but what you can expect next from the Nevada Housing Coalition, we are committed to the treasurer, to the governor, to the legislature in putting together a comprehensive plan on housing strategies that are strategic, long-term, that get us, really the seed investments that pay off for the long term. Miles, that just stuck with me. And having all the stakeholders at the table, Brooke really nailed it when she showed us the table. That's the table we're going to be setting. If you want to be a part of that conversation, please reach out to me and let us know, because that conversation is happening now. The request for your proposals and ideas is out there now, which feel free to submit your individual ones, but please also come back to the Nevada Housing Coalition. We're here for you and we're here to collect those. And I also want to thank my board chair, Bill Brewer, who's just the most awesome. Thanks, Bill. I forgot to thank you earlier. He's an excellent moderator. I would get way too excited about every single topic. Bill's a little more even keel than me, but he knows his stuff better than me, which I appreciate so much. And he's working hard for rural Nevada and all Nevadans. So thank you all and have a wonderful day. We'll be sharing and saving the chat, sharing this recording and all slides with everybody. Bill, do you have any other message? Did I forget anything?
Oh, Christine, thank you so much. You're way too kind. Amazing presentations today. It really humbles me. I feel like I'm in a room full of really smart people, and it gives me a lot of hope for the future of Nevada that we really can do some good things out of this. So I'm very excited. Thank you for